So I am Dr. Megan Kirby. I am the Dissemination and Implementation Specialist for Language Dynamics Group. I love this job. So today's webinar is teaching complex academic language. And I'm going to go ahead and speak to those of you. This is more about the how-tos. So I would expect that everybody has access to StoryChamps. If you are new to StoryChamps, and you don't come to the table with any background knowledge about what it is, and you don't have a kid, then you'll still get something from this webinar, but you probably will need to go back to our website. I would recommend that you look at like what is StoryChamps. It's a webinar that we have posted from January 2023. It's on the recorded webinars page on our website, and it will give you a good like breakdown. It's almost an unboxing that I do for you to explain what StoryChamps is. But if you do have questions, put them in the chat, or you can just directly message them to me in the Q&A, and I will get to them. All right, so we hear this big term, academic language. What is academic language? It's an academic term. Really in academia, like if you think about in research, we're not talking about academic language in the actual school settings. I was a teacher. This isn't something that we were talking about teaching. We're talking about teaching just like reading. Like, please read this. Please understand or comprehend this. But as researchers, we know that academic language is the most important type of language for school success. So we look at things like language at home and the language you use in social situations outside of the school setting as something separate from the language that you use within the school community and the population that you need to have to be successful in school the rest of your school career. Okay, so that's academic language. Unfortunately, few schools, let me even break this down, to few teachers have tools to teach this stuff. So they may have phonics programs, decoding programs, things to teach how to read words, but not necessarily like curricula that are evidence-based, research grounded, like research evidence-based, grounded in how to understand what it is the heck you just read, right? And I'm not saying that phonics is like we need these programs. They should have been in existence from the get-go. But unfortunately, like the things that need to also be taught explicitly include things like vocabulary, complex sentences, like the structure of sentences, causal, temporal, subordinate clauses. Those are the parts of complex sentences that link things together. Text structures, so the organization of both our narrative language, our storytelling, as well as our expository language. Those they all need to be taught. We can't assume that individuals are going to be learning them from just observation alone. And that's what's really sad to me is that, so I was a teacher before, I was a special ed teacher, had zero access. I was K through 6, so kindergarten or primary grade, if you're in Australia, through 6th grade, which is right, like it's middle school for most districts. And it was, oh God, it was everybody's student that they didn't want. So I was a new teacher in this public school setting. And so all the teachers that were there before didn't want certain kids, and they gave them to me, and it happened to be K through 6. So some of these kids, I don't even have time to rename them, so I'm not going to name them at all, but they would be in general education settings in the classroom for part of the day, and then also be in my classroom when it wasn't appropriate for English language arts instructions. About 50% of them were English language learners on top of that. And I would have a consultant that would come to my classroom that for ESOL, or English as a second language, who would say, I don't know what to do because you already are going to do it. And I was a special education teacher who had zero, well, I had training in ESOL, but I didn't tell them, or ESL. And so this is what bothers me. Like, right, it's everybody assuming that someone else is going to be able to provide these services to these students, especially who are on special education caseloads, who you can do this better than I can. And then they're missed. I can tell you right now that this text structures aspect right here was missed by me. I had no idea that that was a thing. Complex sentences, no idea. but I was really good at teaching vocabulary because it's easy, it's a discrete skill. I was just prone to measuring things and pluses and minuses, discrete skills. It was easier to measure, so therefore it's easier to teach. But these other two things in academic language, I was not providing to my students who were half-time in the general education setting and could have been there longer had I been able to understand what it is they needed to access that curriculum. So I do have what we call regrets. I have regrets. I shouldn't be smiling about this. I'm actually very sad about it. But I can't go back and change the way things are, right? And so had I known today that there existed such a curriculum like Story Champs, there would have been very different outcomes for some of my students that I worked with. So there's nothing more like unattractive than getting teary-eyed. So anyway, so really the emphasis of today's webinar, right, is going to be how do you get from basic storytelling skills, just retelling. So the ability to retell someone else's story is easier than generating your own because someone else gives you all of the content that you need, the character, the setting, the problem, action, or problem, feeling, action, and then some kind of consequence of that action. Did it work or did it not? And then ending and end feeling. All of those things. Those are provided to you with someone else's story. And so no one has to you need to understand that language structure for you to be able to generate your own story and put those content, those nouns, those verbs into what we call buckets, right? And so those are basic retelling skills that you need to listen for, understand, remember those key parts that go into a story. And then when children are young, that's easy. But when they get older, and we get to like fourth grade, students are 8, 9 years old, 9, 10. That's when things really get serious. Okay, so those are those high stakes tests that basically predict how you're going to do the rest of your academic career, right? So if you are not able to demonstrate basic reading comprehension skills, meaning you read a passage and then you can answer WH questions about character, setting, some kind of motivating factor, how was the problem resolved, what did the character do, any of those things. This is how we measure it in the United States. In fourth grade, you can't answer that. Apparently right now, 2 out of 3 students cannot answer that at a proficient level. So the United States, 2 out of 3 kids cannot demonstrate basic reading comprehension capabilities as of 2022. And so this is really sad. So we have our autism rates, and I have some peers, so I'm a behavior analyst, so I have some peers that are working specifically with that. That's 1 in 50 something, might be less now. But 1 out of 3 cannot read at a basic reading level, never mind proficient, a basic reading level. And those basic reading levels, when we look at the story, grammar, complex language, vocab, understanding information, text structures, like how to read a nonfiction article and understand main idea and key details. Super critical for thinking about the way you're going to vote, okay? And getting information to inform your citizenship. Writing, those things, those all come from narrative language. We need a strong narrative language foundation. So that's why I'm the behavior analyst in this setting. And I believe it's a really critical life skill, and I think it's very important. So if we go in a stepwise fashion, right, we've got to work on this first. So here's story grammar. So that's the components of the organization, the structure of our story, the way we make sense of the world that and our experiences and how we put in order what just happened to us and how we make sense of it, right? Then we get into complex language. And that's the linguistic structures, the vocabulary, teaching students then what expository structures are like, making sure that they're able to understand this because it's very different from writing a story. So this right here is where I had problems even in my PhD program. Dr. Trina Spencer is one of the one of the developers of Story Champs, and I remember the first time she handed a paper back to me. I was her PhD student. Um, and it was like, what is this? Because I didn't have any instruction in expository structure. Poor woman. Learned quickly, obviously. So this right here has to be taught. We're not teaching students this in our upper grades, even in high school, right? And then we get to writing. So these upper tiered skills, expository structure, writing, these things are based on earlier skills. Story grammar, this is structure. Complex language, those are the little features that make things sound better, right? More entertaining. However, because, so that, when, after, before, those words that make you sound more intelligent academically. And this is where those things come into contact in advanced schooling. So again, just in summary, we have to teach this stuff first before we teach more complex language. And so it's no wonder why students are not passing and why, I get bad feedback from my professor when I can't write an academic paper because I wasn't given instruction in that. So this is where we really push for a narrative language to be that mediator or that bridge between oral and written language, okay? So first and foremost, stories, super relevant to children. They're sense-making devices for us as humans. So they are familiar structures. They're things that we learn from a very early age. If you're lucky enough to have had caregivers read storybooks to you when you're an infant before you can even remember, but they tell you they read stories to you, or you yourself are someone who read stories to infants, your own children, your own grandchildren, then you know the importance of this as a device to help communicate, to teach language, okay? It's also how we make sense of our experiences. In a structure of beginning, middle, and end, that's how we start teaching individuals to recognize or understand patterns and then to understand what the heck just happened to us. So for Turkey right now, unfortunately, with the earthquake, there's over, I believe, 50,000 deaths. I hope it's not more than that. I don't think it's a million, but I think it's 50,000 deaths is what I heard lately. And so with that being said, you've got individuals who might be the lone survivor in their whole family, right? And so they cannot understand what the heck just happened to them. But there is something called what's called narrative exposure therapy. And that is where you start to piecemeal the individual parts of a story, the beginning, middle, and end, the character setting, problem, action, um, like the plan attempt, right? Consequence, ending, and feeling. When we start to put those things together, and if you're in a therapist role, which I personally am not certified to do, then you would be able to help people put together in sequence and start to cope with the trauma that's happened to them. I myself, so I have a brother who was in Somalia and was in the army in the U.S. Army and had trouble coping with post-traumatic stress disorder. And until he had encountered, and he never got exposure therapy, narrative exposure therapy. So until he had encountered these things where you start talking about it, was he able to process it? And unfortunately was never able to do so, ended up taking his own life. I think back now, and if this was probably those saving things, that's correlation, not causation. I don't want anybody to say like that's causation, but it is correlation to me. So I know the importance of storytelling, and I know how important it is. So for us to think about for academic language, yes, you get all of these things: information discourse, reading comprehension, vocabulary, domain knowledge, content area vocabulary, and writing. But for a lifelong lesson, for you to be able to organize the experiences that you've had based on your memories and your just remembering character setting, the action ending problem, all of these things, and being able to put them in order, it helps us cope, right? And there's lots and lots of research. If you're interested and you need that list, I have it. It's a hobby of mine, obviously. So this is where like we think about in Story Champs, what is our purpose, right? And so we understand that right now, finally, and not everywhere, Is there a push for understanding the science of reading? It's not there's no war, right? So there's the science of reading. There's research that underlies the fact that there are two strands, both of word knowledge and then listening or language comprehension. And you need both to be successful in reading. And so when we look at Story Champs, we think about, let me actually just pull this up. We look at Story Champs. This right here, word recognition, is being covered by programs like Haggerty, letters, training. These are things that are great. We're so happy that they're available to teachers now. They weren't previously. And so when we think about this, we're happy that they're there now. However, this is me, not as a representative, not speaking for anybody, but as a former teacher, I had no idea how much went into reading and reading comprehension besides word recognition. I was missing this whole upper strand. So my story is when I was teaching individuals in special education, also K through 2 as a collab teacher, as a kindergarten teacher, I didn't realize I wasn't teaching all of this. Okay, so background knowledge, I didn't know how to teach that. It's whatever kids came to the table with. Vocabulary, that was easiest to teach because it was whatever the curricula gave me, which unfortunately, I'm going to blow your minds, but most of the reading lists that we have right now, B. Miller, I can name others. If you want a list, let me know. You can email me at the end of the webinar. It's professors asking their students in college, in the graduate programs or in undergraduate programs, at what age do you think you learned to read this word? So it's asking adults, what age do they estimate they learn this word? So it is not accurate at all. It's not based on language samples. So that's how we've ranked tiered words. Blew my mind, super upset about it since I don't have the money to do anything about it. Language structure, no idea what this was, didn't teach it. So that's your subordinate clauses, modifiers, relative pronouns. How do you teach all of those things? Morphological awareness, verbal reasoning. How do you teach figurative language, right? Similes, metaphors. How do you teach students to inference the meaning of new words? Didn't have a curriculum for that. And in what time? So I'm not blaming teachers at all. I need a curriculum for this. I need something to be evidence-based to be provided to me that I can implement, just like the tools that I have for word recognition these days. So like those phonics programs, letters, Haggerty, etc. Literacy knowledge, I used to think that was front cover, back cover, like show me the illustrator, the author. Those were the things that we got measured on for our adaptive assessments for my students with modified curricula. And that actually wasn't what literacy knowledge meant. So regrets, total regrets here. And I came from, quote unquote, one of the best counties in the United States for education. So I'm not gonna tell you where we went to school. So this is where Story Champs comes in. Had I known that this tool was available and there, I would have used it. So what we have is Story Champs right now as it exists is a multi-tiered language intervention curriculum. So it says intervention, ignore it if you're a gen ed teacher. Okay, so ignore the word intervention because I know that that now throws it out and now you can't use it. But if it's a curriculum, right, this is most of your students. Anybody on here that's like an SLP or an interventionist sped teacher, anybody else knows right now that like kids are not getting this. But if you're a gen ed teacher or literacy coach, this is actually what students are probably missing because they're getting only that word, the phonics instruction, like a legit systematic phonics instruction as they should continue to need. But what they're not getting is the flip side of that coin, which is the listening comprehension or language comprehension piece, which is what we're here for today, right? And I'll get to that. Then we've got tier 2. So we have lesson plans for tier 1, we have lesson plans for tier 2 and tier 3. Now this is where I need us all to be on the same page on, which is I need us to all know that before you teach complex language, we have to have a basic linguistic, the structure of the story has to be established. You teach story structure before you go ahead and teach any more complex language. And so that means, and actually, like, let me move beyond this. Right down here, this is a minimally complete episode. This is, imagine you're on a playground. If you work at a school setting, and I'll get to those who don't, but you work at a school setting and you're on the playground, you have playground duty or bus duty, and some kid is crying and they come up to you because you're the authority figure. The first thing you ask is, what's going on? What's happening? Had the individual child been able, had they narrative structure, discourse structure established proficient in their repertoire, they would tell you, like, character setting problems, all of these things, the things they tried that didn't work, and how they felt. These things up here, those story grammar elements. But when they don't, what you're left with here is you have to ask them these probing interrogation type techniques of, wait, well, hold on. What just happened? Right? Wait, what did you do about the, like, I'm sorry, where were you? What was going on? And then what did you do that you're still crying to me, sobbing, and snot's coming out of your mouth? And then it didn't work because that's why you're coming to me. You want to get all that information. That is called a minimally complete episode. It's when we can't get this that we cannot provide help to that child. In a school setting, that means we want to help you resolve your situation. I had a student, if you're unfortunate enough to have listened to my story before, I had a student, let's truncate it, who was an adult who was in a group home, went to day school. I was their teacher, would come in, couldn't communicate the fact to this. They were very upset. And then a year went by where we tried all these different things, but never addressed the issue. They would come in, they would engage this problem behavior. We would send them to the specialists, not BCBAs, but behavior specialists who would then be like I don't know, they were undergrads with psychology degrees. So they would end up getting them on Seroquel, which is a chemical restraint, right? Because you are hitting your head into a wall and we don't know what's going on and you can't tell us and we don't want you to hurt yourself and give yourself a TBI. So that's what was happening but it was intermittent and it wasn't on a predictable pattern. Enter me. I take data on this. I was going to school to get my BCBA, my behavior analyst certification, and end up finding out just by happenstance, there's a pattern in this about once a month. So part of us were thinking menstrual cycle. The other half of us, like for me, was like, I don't know, something else is up. It's not lining up with this cycle. 6 months, so it was a year after I came on board, that the individual that was driving the student to and from their work job site was arrested, or maybe not arrested, was charged or found that they had been abusing, sexually assaulting other individuals that were going to the job site. So what we could deduce from this is that this young client was most likely being abused by this person and could not communicate to us when they got back to school what was happening to them. I guarantee you, had I taught them or had anybody taught them these skills of being able to communicate who, what, when, where, why, how, not those WH questions. I don't want to ask them, but if I said, hey, tell me about what's going on, I would get all the accurate information and would not lead them in an interrogation. Right? I don't want to teach them. If we teach them story elements and story structure, we're not teaching them to answer interrogation questions. Like, if you have ever been through a divorce or have encountered anybody through a divorce or you're a product of it, there are those questions like, oh, and I'm a female, so pardon me, but like, oh, was she over there this weekend? Right? Like, did she spend the night? There are these leading questions that someone else may ask you if you're the child, right? That may or may not end up being true, that are leading. And that's not what we want to teach. If you know stories, if someone gives you the prompt, meaning, tell me about what's going on, tell me what happened, tell me about your weekend, we will actually get accurate information if we've taught narrative structure. Okay, so here's what's important for us to know in the long run, right? It's not just language complexity, but once you have story structure, then the rest of it entails. That's the because, when, after, before. Those things matter, especially when we get into like accuracy. So Story Champs not only teaches that story structure, the story grammar, but we also teach that complex language, right? So this is grammar, this is syntax. For those of you, these are the features of our language that make sentences more complex, more appropriate. This is academic language, right? So these are sentences that have adverbs in them, temporal subordinate clauses. Right? So when, that's the when, after, before, while, as, until. Those are examples. Then we've got causal subordinates. So those are clauses that connect, like one event causes another, or vice versa, right? One event then causes another here. And that's things like because, so that. So those are examples. Even though. And then you've got things like elaborated noun phrases. So down here, there's two parts to this. So we want to have students listen to stories that have both adjectives before the nouns that make them more entertaining, right? Adverbs that happen after the verb, so the LYs, as well as relative pronouns. So that's what you see here is that. So the example here is the enormous dog. That was scary. So the word that immediately follows a noun. So that's a relative pronoun. The enormous is an adjective that definitely emphasizes the dog or elaborates upon it. You can have two adjectives, the enormous loud dog. That would be exemplary. We want to teach that. And in Story Champs, we do program that eventually. That could be that, which, who, whose. Those are all relative pronouns. But what you don't see here is that the LYs, the adverbs, and we do teach those. Mental and linguistic verbs. I want you to think about when would you hear your own child, if you have one, or other children, the students that you teach, just like casually mention the words decided, or I was considering inviting these kids to my birthday party, or I planned on having my birthday on a Saturday. That would be weird, right? But these are the words that our students encounter in the readings that we have to teach, and we're not teaching it explicitly. So Story Champs goes ahead and does that. Like we program these words in the stories for them on purpose. Then we have conjunctions. I'm gonna bypass this because those are easy. Those appear in language, in stories, outside of stories, all over us. Those easy words like and, but. But dialogue is also not something that we include very frequently. I did this to myself one time and that was it. Now I do it for everybody else. I would love for you to record yourself telling a story to a family member, maybe if you're if you're out with friends and it's one of those, you're not drinking, you're just happy hour with no alcohol. And so you're just telling a story, as one does. Record yourself telling a story. And I would love for you to measure the degree to which you include character setting, some kind of problem, a feeling in response to the problem. Do you have this model complete and coherent? How good are our language models that we are providing to children without intervention? And are we including dialogue when we're doing this? Probably not. We're also really not doing really well in terms of story structure. I guarantee it. And so when we end up copying our friends, I'm not saying that any of you do, but if we copy our friend's story or a sibling story, any family member story, at a party where we know they're not there, but it's a really good story, and no one could ever check us and know that it wasn't ours. Those are the reasons why. They're entertaining because they contain all of these things and they're complete and coherent. Okay, so that's what makes a good story. That's what gets us the friends. Those are the social skills, the communication skills that we need to have. So you can have a complete story. It could be very boring, But when you add in this complex language, which is the reason why we're here for this webinar today, that's what makes it a really, really good story in which you make friends and you maintain those friendships. So this is a snapshot for those. I'm assuming that all of us here today have a Story Champs kit, but if you don't, lo siento, I'm sorry, like you'll get one. Hopefully I've convinced you that you need one. Get in touch with me if you're curious about the cost. But they're on our website, www.languagedynamicsgroup.com. But this is what they come with. The popsicle sticks have changed. They're color coded to match the stickers. But we have these storybooks that are carefully structured so that they contain vocabulary words in them, so you can target vocabulary. I want to point out the whole purpose is academic language and complex language today. So we're going to be focusing on these blitz stories, right? So this is where there is vocabulary words explicitly planted in these stories that you need to teach the definition of, and then also vocabulary purposely included that you help teach kids to infer the meaning of new words, right? That's the goal, because there's no way in heck that we're ever going to be able to provide kids with explicit instruction and all the potential vocabulary words they need to be successful into adulthood. Like, we're not following them around with flashcards. We need to teach them the skill of how to infer word meaning when no one is there next to you to teach you how to use a dictionary, because those don't exist anymore. So this is kind of a breakdown in a snapshot of what our stories teach, okay? So when you go into Story Champs, you need to have an idea of my students just really need basic story structure. So that's just like 5. Please, please, please tell me a story with a character, a problem, a feeling in response to the problem, an action, and an ending. Okay, like just 5 parts. That's very basic. That gets you to the beginning of kindergarten or primary school year. And so that's just a basic story for me to understand. Then we get into enhance, which is add setting and end feeling, and then enhance plus and advanced. Advanced is your double episode. We also want to know, do we need to help kids? They need to learn retell because it's easier to tell someone else's story before you tell your own. Then you need to tell your own, generate a fictional story, not a personal story. Information, story, and info writing. How to write a story and then how to write information retell. So we also have goals and lesson. So we have lesson plans for all these. I'm not going to go through all these anymore. But we have lesson plans for every single individual little combination that you could think of for all of these. But today we're going to focus on mostly the lesson plans. Sorry, going through fast. That you have for the large group, small group, one-to-one, and add-on. So it's multi-tiered. So you buy one kit, and hopefully those of you who have kits, actually in chat, please reinforce me. If you have ever shared a lesson, or if you're a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher who knows a special educator that also is using it, or SLP or BCBA that's using it, I want to know. I really want to know. So that you're not the only one in your district. So is there collaboration going on? Please, I will, and you should also DM me your email so I can reward you with something. Please let me know, because this is what my hopes are. Is that this is a multi-tiered program. So one classroom has it, and then if other kids need supports, they can use our cubed assessment. It's free to identify are kids making progress or not. Do some kids need supplemental tier 2 instruction? We can find out. But we have a lesson plan for each of these levels. No one's commenting. Okay. So we teach SLP students in our grad program. Oh, I just came back from University of South Carolina, oh my God, they're gonna kill me. Southern California, it's USC, Southern California, and train them in our new cubed that is not yet published. So if you are interested in training them on the new cubed, let me know. I'm an SLP who bought a kit for this year for services. My school has bought 2 kits and another one Spanish, English. Yes, Kelly. Yes, I love hearing the bilingual piece. We do have a Spanish English Story Champs kit. Audrey, we'll get you help. Don't know anybody. We'll get you help. Kelly K1, hopefully everybody's using it. Danielle says just me, the SLP, I'm using it so far. Baby steps. It's a 3-year process, right? To get it implemented, baby steps. Okay. Junior high, they don't have it yet. I'm loving this feedback. I'm gonna love this. Folks love the new benchmarking. Folks want to know how to train others. I am here for you. Get you some other webinars. Or you can email me and ask me questions. That's my job. Like, you don't have to pay for me. Unless I will tell you need to pay for me. So I think that in this aspect right here, let me just continue. I haven't shown you what I need to show you. Collier County, I love you. Right, Sandy? We should talk though. They need to pay me. So, so let me get to this, and then I'm going to show you my email at the end. And I hope I hear from you guys who are here today. Anybody who's watching this recorded doesn't get this aspect. All right. So enhanced, when you get Story Champs and you download, so all the lesson plans, by the way, are on the flash drive. You need to download the lesson plan first, not the stories. Don't open the storybook, pick a story and start and go through A to Z. Like, don't go through levels A through J. It all starts from picking a Story Champs lesson plan that tells you what story level. So if I picked a Story Champs lesson, I have a small group. Small group is 2 to 4 students. Once you hit 5, you're large group. I know in your mind it's small group, and to the rest of the school, small group, whatever, but that's a large group to us. And we don't want you to adapt this lesson plan. It's meant for 4 students, 2 to 4 students. So do not spend time adapting something when we already have it made. Use a large group. So for small group, lesson plan 26, it's enhanced story structure, which means we have 7 story grammar components. I have this memorized, you're not supposed to. You choose, it says, hey, choose any classic or Blitz level B story. So level B, you can choose classic stories or Blitz. That's what this means. And you'll know when you get your storybook. Get your illustrations ready. Get your icons. These are the only icons that you need. Doesn't show any others. Okay. And then it says, hey, choose a story game. So this is your prep. This is what I do before I have the students in front of me. Okay. I don't know what I just did. Sorry. There's also this aspect here. Like, let's say that I want to move from enhanced story structure, which I have 7 components, and this is complex language. I want to start teaching them those metacognitive verbs like planned, decided, considered. I also want to teach consequence versus ending. So basically what I'm telling you right now is I'm moving from level B to level C. And I do this because, one, my lesson plan tells me to do so. And I look at the upper corner. Always check these out, by the way. Look at what they're talking to you about. Or I've done the cubed, it's our free assessment, NLM listening or reading. If you don't know what it is, please email me. I'm going to tell you right now. Got a favor for you and a deal for you. So you're going to email me at the end of this for a secret surprise. So you would consider add-on lessons. Like, a part of you should be like, what is this? Right? So you would check this out. And in that particular case, let's say I have, does not match. This is horrible for me. Horrible, Megan. But let's say it wasn't that one lesson plan. I want to teach plan and consequence, right? So I want to move from this level B to level C. Okay, the next level up. So 7 story grammar icons to 9. And this is where I get questions about. There is a lesson plan for you to teach this to help differentiate between the planned and consequence icons, between the ending, right? Between how do you teach consequence versus ending? And this is how you go ahead and do it. It says, hey, use with master lesson plan, it tells you what, right? And then it says what to do. So introduction, I'm going to teach you some new icons and additional parts of stories. Step 2, ignore 1 and 2 on the master lesson plan. You're going to go ahead and follow the steps here and then go over here to whatever it tells you to do. So I'm going to teach you some new icons, some new little cues, whatever you call them. in my mind, they're still pogs, but I don't know how old you are, but those are what they are to me. And so these are new icons, additional part of stories. And then I've got my illustrations. I read the story. That's almost like model the story part. I place the icons, the 7 ones that I've always done, those are here, on the illustrations as I'm reading. And then here's my step right here, introduce and explain the new icons. So I would introduce this. This represents the plan. Our character needs to think of a way to fix their problem. They need to think of a way. So we don't see what they're going to do, but they have to decide what they're going to do. That's a plan. So it's something that is inside their brain, right? So we can't observe it. I'm a behavior analyst. We call this radical behaviorism. I got a fancy term for it, but it is real. And that's when you're considering, deciding, planning those verbs that are thinking verbs. And so you can modify, we give you a script here, but you can modify it to meet the needs of any of your students, okay? Just be natural. I clearly would not be like, this is radical behaviorism. Sounds like they're drinking the tea. Then we would also, so we'd put down the plan icon, which is that thinking bubble with the question mark in the middle, right? So that's this one right here. And then we talk about the consequence. So then we'd say, and the consequence is the part that tells us action or what the character took or did to fix the problem. So what happens immediately, like right away after the character's action? Did it work? So I've modified whatever this script is that's here, and you're allowed to do that. So we're giving you a basic script, but we want it to sound natural. So this is not the end all be all. This is not a DI program, a direct instruction program where you can't modify it. We're just giving you a script to give you something that will help you be more natural, but also explicitly teach them what the definition is. So this is what differentiates us between like a DI program versus not, okay? So this is a flexible ingredient, but we want you to explicitly teach them what these parts mean, okay? So I would say like what happened immediately after the character's action. So after their attempt. And sometimes I do the gesture because they're familiar with it. I've been doing this. Usually I've been doing lesson plan 2 for a while before I introduce this. So they're familiar with story gestures. And for me, the action is grabbing a star and putting it in your pocket. So it's the seatbelt action. Nerdy fact, Scott Geller is a behavior analyst, not a BCBA, but like a behavior analyst from Virginia Tech after the school shootings that enacted like this wristband thing, and it's actively caring for people. And so after that first mass school shooting, he wanted to go out and help others like care for their peers, right? And so one of the things that he did with his daughter in the car when she was little was go promote wearing seatbelts. And so you do that on airlines and other things. And so for me, this meant instead of like doing a shooting star out into space, which means, hey, hit the pier next to you, I grab my seatbelt and I buckle it, right? So that's my action, and my homage to the Gellers. But for this part right here, that's what I do. So I tell them like, okay, so buckle your seatbelt. This is the action. But what happens immediately after you buckle? What do you do? Like, do you continue to ride in the car? And so I'm separating for them what a consequence means from an ending, right? So you can do that and make it personable and real for you. For these parts right here, so for this add-on, it says, okay, you're going to explain these things and what they mean, point to all the storygram parts, and then finish the steps of the master lesson plan, which means, boom, go to partner retail, which is exactly what you would do with the CHAMPS checks, okay? And I've got, oh my gosh, I hate when I forget to do this. So these are, in the add-on 63, these are the 2 icons that you teach. I hate when I forget this. Okay. I want you to also know that we have an add-on lesson plan for when you start to need to do causal and temporal connections. Okay, so this is when you're like, hey, they're getting the basics of the story structure, but I want to make sure that they also start using when, after, before, those temporal features, because so that those causal terms, right? So what I would say is this story has some special words in it. They're connection words because they connect two parts of a story together. Sorry, I went to undergrad for sign language for deaf ed. But they connect two parts of the story together. So causal connection words tell us that one part of the story caused the other part. For example, because. So he felt sad because he hit his knee, right? He was happy because he got a Band-Aid, right? And so I would give them examples. Temporal connection words so are words like when and after. So when he hit the rock, he felt sad. Right? After he hit the rock, he felt sad. So I would give them examples. So that's just sample language that we give you when we give you the add-on lesson plans. Again, they're just for the few first times that you start to teach these new terms and these new icons, and repeat. What we have you do is, like we say, repeat the sentences that these words appear in the story. So when you hear a storybook and you're teaching us for the first time, I'm not endorsing this because we do not endorse. I'm seeing if Mike is on here, my boss. But we do not endorse you ever going ahead and and he's on here, Xerox copying. Do not Xerox copy these stories. But in my mind, in preparation, I do highlight, so if you're worried, I have this one kit I have for the whole school, mark up the heck about it, mark it up. I personally, I wish I could show you, is that in my storybook, I don't have an example right now in these slides. If you ever want an example, I have it all marked up where the character is underlined in purple, because that's the way it is in the cubed, the NLMs. The setting is orange. So when I know to put the story grammar markers, like the icons on the story in my first step, model story, which is the first step for any lesson, so I can't really mess up, I go ahead and mark them up for all my story levels. I've never made it to J. And so that when I'm reading the story, I know when to put them out, right? And so it goes also for the temporal connections. I know when to go ahead and read those aspects of the story. Okay, so don't be afraid. Please mark them up. The worst thing that could happen is that you leave the school and someone says, why is this marked up? And it's just a benefit to them that it's color coded. But that is my pro tip. I've been doing this for research and a lot of a while. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's worth it, right? And you really can't mess it up for anybody else. Don't be afraid your school will be mad. So anyway, so this is the sample language that the first few times I'm teaching causal and temporal connections, those little icons, this connection, this Lego green icon, this is how I teach it. And so I would really encourage you to do this. So if even if you're at level A, you're not doing Blitz, you're not doing Blitz stories, it's good for you to start having your students practice using because, so that, and some of those words, okay? If you have any questions, throw them in chat because I can definitely get to your specific student questions. So this is here where it's model story. That's the same as 1, but 2 says causal and temporal connection. This is how I teach it. So I explain to them what causal is. I give them examples. I read the stories. I explain to them what temporal is. That's developmental sequence, causal then temporal. I give them examples. I put the icons on or near. Some kids freak out when you put icons on the illustrations or near the corresponding illustration cards. And then it says, finish the steps of the master lesson plan. In that particular case, this, let me go over here. So this 1, same as 1. This 2, insert above Team Retail. So it's the new 2. And now Team Retail is 3, individual retail 1 is 4, individual retail 2 is 5, 6, and 7. So when it says finish steps of master lesson plan, you now have a total of 7 steps to finish. So if you have any questions about that, you need clarification, reach out to me and I'll get it. Okay. I did that. So sorry, y'all. So this is an example of when I'm using the materials. It said right here, use a classic level or Blitz level B story, right? And here's why, is because in that level B Blitz, Look at how many causal words I have here and how many temporal. I have because, so 3 causals. And then I have 2 temporals, after and when. So it's really easy for me to help them identify, and I would have been repeating those sentences. And this is an example of when they appear. You can also put them in between. I prefer them in between because they connect the events together. Causal terms connect events versus they happen on events. So just my personal preference is those icons would be between these illustrations. Okay. We also, if you just want to teach causal connections, we also have its own lesson plan. But this is where, so before we could use level A or level B. If you're just using add-on, it says like you can use it with any of these lesson plans. So large group lesson plan 1 is definitely level A, stories. I just know that from memorization, you're not supposed to know that unless you've been using it for a while. But if you are fully committed to just teaching causal connections, they've got established the 7 story grammar markers 90% of the time. Okay, then there's a whole group one. But then I'm going to use these causal connections, this actual lesson plan that's just for this teaching this. Okay, so this is not adding on to enhance story structure. It's its own master lesson plan, and this is why. Okay, so I'm going to use this icon and look at the difference. I don't know if you remember the slide that we just saw, which was the level B story had only 3 becauses. And those are 3 causal ties. This one now, boom, 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 boom. Look at all of these. Okay, so we have so much more. And thank you all for staying on. I know we're at like an hour. But this right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 causal ties. So if you're working with kids that do not use causal subordinate clauses, the level C is where you're at. This is your focus because they can retell a story that has all the parts, but they are not doing so in a cohesive manner because they're not using these. I just used because they're not using these terms. All right, they're the connection icons that need to be connecting these events. So we have instructions in which you would use these. You would go ahead and add this icon to your lesson plan. Then if you want to teach the temporal subordinate clauses, you do that after they got causal. And how do you know when you need to move on to this? The cubed, the NLM reading or listening, but you would use the cubed, which is our free assessment. If you don't know about it, you need to email me. We'll talk about this in a minute. If you stay on, you might get like a perk. And so this is temporal connection. So causal needs to be established before temporal. Please, please, for those of you still here, please establish that before you move to temporal. Do not work on both at the same time, unless you're in a large group setting. But developmentally, causals come before temporals. Then causal, then we take away all the causals. We do focus on temporal, because we don't leave all of them in. We do focus stimulation, temporals, and then we take those out, all those extra temporal, like after, when, before, while, as, until. We take those out, and then we program in all these modifiers. And that's when you see stories that will have blitz words, the vocabulary, the adverbs, the adjectives, okay? But we took out all those extra becauses, so that's, otherwise we'd have this story that's so long that the student couldn't focus, we call it focus stimulation, on the things that are actually in the story, right? And we want them to learn modifiers. This is how. So this is when you're using the blitz, how to teach inferencing. And we have if you want a webinar for this and you want a quick link and not have to find it, you can also email me. I'll give you it in a second. We have stories in level E finally that go with, look at the right here, look at our adjectives. Slowly, extremely, calmly, quickly, totally, kindly, like look at all of these things that we have purposely programmed in there and did not add on top to the causal and temporal. We took those out and added in these. It's still the same illustrations. So all of the thought and just the thoughtfulness that went into this and programming that Doug and Trina, Dr. Peterson and Spencer put in is why I went back to get my PhD with them. Like Trina is like, this is so purposeful and I love it. I owe them nothing, but I love it. So those of you still on here, I almost wish I could hit pause. Those of you who are not. But here's some ideas for like goals. So if you have some students where you know that they're not ready to be discharged or they need to continue to work on language programs, language comprehension, listening programs, imagine a first grader with language impairment. Spanish is their home language, so their English language learner on top of that. We did a cubed measure, and their retail, the story grammar, which is discourse structure, is pretty good. It's 18. I know that from memory. You wouldn't know that. Listening comprehension, the language complexity is 2. So that's their use of because, so that when after all of the sentence level structure, those complexity features, not so great. So compared to the discourse structure where they've got the elements of the story, they're not using those ties. Vocabulary comprehension, not great either. So they're not able to make inferences about new words, which is important for English language learner. We need to teach them that skill. So I might have, for this student who's identified in need of an IEP, given a model story with contextual support. So in other words, a Blitz story champ story. I probably just messed up because I have my mic, but given a Blitz story, right, that has 3 unknown words. So I can tell you right now, that's B, giving you guys tips. That's a level B story. A reminder to listen for the new words, because you do that in your lesson. Javier will define 2 of the 3 words correctly. So in other words, he'll get a score of 2 or 3 on like an NLM reading or listening. Okay. So they will actually give a model story. Yeah. So it's reading or listening, or listen for new words, excuse me. NLM listening. Javier will get a score of 2 or 3 on 2 out of the 3 words on the NLM listening. So we've said it without actually saying the NLM listening, which is really important, as we all know, work for school districts, even though it's free. And we'll say that he'll do that correctly and clearly on 2 consecutive bi-weekly probes. So every other week, we'll do progress monitoring and we'll give that vocabulary questions section. And I'll get a score of either a 2 or a 3 on 2 out of the 3 words. And that's what we mean by measured using a vocabulary scoring rubric. So if you want to know what that looks like, let me know. I also have a graph that I've made for the existing cubed. We have a new version coming out. If you're curious about that, I need your help. So you should get in touch with me. So write a goal for Dahlia. So this is Dahlia. So Dahlia is a preschooler with language impairment. So obviously identified with such, right? Receiving Story Champs instruction for a few months. So in this preschool, let's say she's a 4-year-old. Her, as it should be. So her lessons have been focusing on using story grammar. So just having a complete coherent story. Probably the 5, level A is aligned, and this is, you can be flexible because I don't know where you are in the whole world, but on average, the level A stories are usually normed with preschool ages. So children aged 4, all the beginning or the end, middle to end of their 5th year. Okay, so that's like kindergarten / primary. Okay, so let's think about that. So Dahlia has been receiving Story Champs for a little while, working on organization, retelling, complete episode. Right? So for this particular student, I might think about, hey, if they listen to a new story completely unheard of, I don't want them to memorize a story. So if I'm the administrator, I'm an examiner, I tell them a story. Right? I want Dahlia, and this story has 3 subordinate clauses. So it's pre-programmed. So this tells me right now that it's a level A story. So it'd be preschool, or it's a preschool level NLM listening, because we do that already. So after listening to a brief story, novel, never heard before, so there's no chance of memorization, Dahlia will retell that same story using 1 that says causal subordinate clause, and probably two temporal. Yep, two temporal subordinate clauses. God, I hate when I do. Sorry, y'all. Spelling errors. So one causal, causal, and two temporal subordinate clauses. So that's three subordinate clauses, one causal, two temporal. On two consecutive, so twice a week. So clearly I'm doing at least 2 sessions of Story Champs a week. And what I do is the NLM listening right before I do my Story Champs lesson. Otherwise I poison the well, and like if she moves to another district or another speech pathologist or anybody, and they don't do it right before, they're gonna wonder who the heck I am. And they're gonna be like, how did they get the score? So always do your progress monitoring, your assessment, use our NLM, our free cubed measures. Please use them as your data collection tools. Do not poison the well of Story Champs. If you have any problems with this, reach out to me individually, off record. Do not use Story Champs. Don't use a rubric. Don't try to measure accuracy of Story Champs lessons, because you should be using errorless learning, okay? So I'm so sorry. We are 10 minutes over. It's my bad. So a couple more. So after listening to a double episode story with 3 relative pronouns, so there's that, which, who, and whose. So we're talking about a level J Story Champ story. So this is most likely a 2nd grade NLM listening or reading, or 2nd grade or 3rd grade NLM listening or reading. Your student will retell the story. And I would say novel. This isn't practice. They haven't heard it before. They will retell the story using at least 2 elaborated noun phrases marked by who or that. Okay, so we include those in our stories on purpose. That's why we wrote them, so that we know that we're going to elicit those in the retells, measured using frequency count. So if you're curious, if you want to take your own language samples, for example, if you're using things like Frog, Where Are You? We have an awesome tool for you. It's validated, gone through all the measurement procedures. It's just currently under review. Like, I don't know what back and forth but it's going to get published soon. We're just priming it for publication, and trying to cut down on the number of words so it can be ready to go. But this is a free tool that will be available as soon as the damn journal approves it, as an appendix. If you want this now, I would love to provide it to you. So I'll give you my email. This is the NLM flowchart, so the narrative language measures flowchart. It's going to be a part of our new cubed measures that's going to come out the 3rd edition. So this is the sentence complexity, or what we used to call linguistic complexity, language complexity section. So relative pronouns, noun, verb, modifiers, how's their vocabulary, temporal, causal, subordinate clauses, dialogue. If you're measuring written language, we have a writing convention section, which is important, especially for our general education or grade level teachers. And then on the flip side of the same form, we have narrative discourse measures. So that's like, to what extent do they include character setting problem, whether it's a retell language sample or whether it's a generation, okay? And so I'd be more than happy to send this to you so you don't have to wait. Lord knows how long the journals will take. And I can provide this to you like now. All right, so here's my contact. I am so sorry. So this is just like a free webinar, and I always feel guilty, but it's free, because that's it for me. So I encourage you actually to reach out to me. Reach out to our Facebook, our professional learning community. Right at the very bottom, we have this web address where you can you can join and see what everybody's ever asked us about Story Champs, or asked each other. So Trina, Doug, myself, Olivia, who is our illustrator, all hands on deck. And so we will answer you if no one else will first. So we try to wait till other teachers, SLPs, folks provide each other with help. And if not, one of us will answer. I also would love, if you want a certificate for this webinar, just go ahead and scan this with your phone right now, and it'll take you to the form and you fill it out. Please make sure your email is like legit. Otherwise, you won't get the certificate. I hold free webinars the first Wednesday of every month, except for, I believe, June or July. I think July. I think that's my break month. But we're going to have some coming up for information lessons, just a quick 1 hour like snapshot like today. In fact, we went over an hour. And then also middle school, high school students, how to use Story Chunks with them. And then we're going to introduce our new Cubed, our third edition, coming this summer. And so you'll see Doug as a part of that. If you have any questions about the Perl language screener, anything else, you can get in touch with me. This is my job. Please make my job worth it. And so you can't ask any silly questions. So I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions that are all in the chat. If you have any, you can stay on. If not, I really appreciate your time. And thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so I can answer.